In this Thursday's episode of Bible Study Greek, we're going to look at Philippians 2:5 and a pesky little demonstrative pronoun. Last Thursday, we looked at Philippians 2:4. Each person should look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interests of others. That gives us the context for our verse today, Philippians 2:5. And the word in question is this tuta, this demonstrative pronoun. So this, you'll notice that the verb means to think. You can see translations struggling with this. We'll come back to that. So think this in yourselves. So the church as a whole is to have a certain attitude, which also in Christ Jesus. So the church is to think, the church is to think this way, and this way is the same that was in Christ Jesus. Now, when you first look at the pronoun, you go, well, what's this referred to? Well, when you read contextually, you move into the great hymn in verse 6 and following, and Paul's going to explain how they're supposed to be thinking the same way, that they are to have the attitude that was illustrated in Christ's humiliation, in his incarnation. So think this, in other words, think like Christ did. That attitude is to permeate the church. Now, here's the interesting question. I guess there's two. First of all, what does it mean to think this? Which just by itself means to think. But the problem is that if you tell someone to think this, what does that mean? Does it mean that I am telling you exactly what you have to believe? That you have to think, you have to believe A, and you have to believe B, and you have to believe C? Well, that's not the kind of cultish approach to the Christian life that Paul has. But rather, what he wants them to do is to adopt an attitude of humility as illustrated by Christ. That is what is to define them as a church. So how are you going to say that without mistakenly creating a cult? Think this. You have to believe this. Well, it's interesting to see the different translations struggle with this. NASB is have this attitude, which is a good translation. ESV, have this mind among yourselves. CSB, adopt the same attitude. NRSV, let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. And the NIV kind of moves things around a bit, but isn't any more interpretive. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ. So they're translating the mindset, the phroneta as mindset. But also, notice, why did they say in your relationships with one another? Is that the NIV being overly interpretive? Absolutely not. It's the NIV's way of saying this is a plural. See, how do you bring out the fact that Paul is talking to the church as a whole, plural, and that they together, plural, are to have this singular attitude? Well, in your relationships with one another. It's interesting then when you go back, CSB, there's no idea that it's plural. ESV says yourselves, that's indicating the plural. So does the NASB. Go over to the Net Bible. You should have the same attitude toward one another that Christ had. And you notice that in the footnote, you can see that it is a plural. So there's several things here that are kind of interesting. One is, this is plural. It's not individual attitudes, but it's the attitude of every individual in the church as a whole. And they're not a cult. They don't have to believe this and believe that. It's a mindset. It's how you approach life, one of humility. So several interesting things going on in Philippians 2:5.